Audio unleashed. All right, buddy, tape's rolling. Let's make a podcast, man.
Why?
Why? Why not?
Well, what else do we have to do?
Well, we have some ignorance to disabuse people of, apparently. There's a big old pile of it. Yeah.
We do. Ignorance is such a rare commodity these days. We have to kind of jump on it when we find it.
Oh, I think the surprising thing is that we have some decidedly non-ignorant content to work with here, though.
To start with.
That's the gem. Yeah. I think we've got something really smart and practical to start with. What a rare treat. Yeah. Oh, so
which is what?
We have got a video from Aaron's Audio Corner. Everybody knows we love Aaron, but Aaron often does these very in-depth technical reviews of speakers and things like that, and I think that's mostly what he's known for, but this is a little bit of a different video. The headline of the video sounds a little clickbaity. Maybe it is. Improve your stereo with these 3 easy tips, but that's what it really is Aaron giving very practical, very real-world advice about how to set up stereo speakers, how to set up your stereo system as a whole in your room. But he also talks about some aspects of speaker placement that we don't see discussed a lot. Something that we actually sort of talked a little bit about in the last episode, but he dives much deeper, gives much more practical results. And I think we're going to have a lot to chew on in this video. But we'll get there in due time. What do you want to talk about?
There's some seemingly very basic stuff in there that frankly took me years to learn, and that honestly, some people don't know. Yeah. So you'd be surprised. I have a story to share about that, in fact.
Oh, very good.
Well, we're going to go downhill real fast from there, or for the people that tune into this to hear us trash stupid crap, it's going to go way uphill. It's going to be like incredible. So we, the first of
you and I are thinking of hills in very different terms here, because I'm thinking of it uphill like Sisyphus. Like we've got to push this damn boulder up this hill.
Okay. Well, if it goes downhill, though, it's bad. So uphill would be good, but downhill or uphill, I guess, is bad. Anyway, that's a conversation for like an English podcast, but which this is not. But
no,
we're going to talk about a review in Stereophile of the REL number 31 powered subwoofer, and this was a peculiar setup. It's 2 $7,500 subwoofers set up in the system, crossed over at 29 hertz to a pair of tower speakers. And the things that were said in the review and the things that were said by the manufacturer, some of whom's products I like, actually, but the stuff that's said is just so preposterous. And I think we're going to do a little bit of a deep dive into just some of the stupid crap audiophiles say about subwoofers.
Yeah.
And where do we go from there?
From there, we're going to end up discussing a topic that began with Ted Denny, interestingly enough, although Ted Denny quickly became irrelevant in this story. So I belong to this Facebook group called Audio BS, if we're going to put it politely, and try to avoid the content filters. And they typically have like a spy in the group who is monitoring Ted Denny's post. Now, Ted Denny is a person we've talked about plenty of times before. He runs what is the name of his Synergistic Research is the company that he runs. And let's just say Ted has a reputation for selling snake oil, perhaps. I think that would be a way to put it. And also he has a reputation for suing people who claim that he has a reputation for selling snake oil.
We probably shouldn't say that then.
No, maybe.
We're not saying his stuff is snake oil.
We're saying he has a reputation
reputation for it. And I think that certainly judging from the Facebook group that you mentioned, you could prove that he has a reputation within, among certain people, not among everybody, because he still sells a lot of product.
Yeah.
Clearly he has a good reputation with some people, but a bad reputation with others.
Well, interestingly, that also sort of, I think, would apply to the other subject of this discussion. So anyway, Ted was linking to a video from Lachlan of Passion for Sound called "Why You Shouldn't Trust Blind Audio Tests," brackets, according to science. Science all in capital letters there. And then Ted goes on to explain why they actually do blind audio tests, but you can't, I don't know, but he's disproving and proving his point all in the same time. But anyway, it led me to watching this video from Lachlan that claims to sort of use science to explain why science doesn't work. Would be a way to put it. It's basically saying you can't do blind audio testing for these reasons. And it's really just a response to his critics that have sort of flooded him with comments going, okay, but if you had done blind testing, would you have heard these things you claim to hear? And this is his response saying, well, here's why that's not valid. And, you know, that means that I can keep telling you about, you know, $25,000 DAX or whatever. But anyway, long story short, it's all a roundabout backdoor way of him promoting this concept called slow listening, which I know you've written about before. So we're going to dig into that. We're going to talk about all of this stuff, I guess, and hopefully keep our blood pressures down in the process, although that's going to be difficult.
Oh, no. We're not doing that.
We don't want to have an aneurysm live on air, man. So we've got patrons to feed here, patrons to keep happy. They're the ones that pay for this show. So we're going to have a special segment for them. What are we going to talk about?
Well, I heard about this from Clay Anderson, who's one of our listeners. And it's this article circulated fast because I saw it. It popped up in Sean Olive's Facebook feed. Lauren Dragon, who's the Wirecutter headphone editor and good friend of the podcast, was talking about this article on our Wirecutter Slack. The article is titled, "Are Noise-Canceling Headphones to Blame for Young People's Hearing Problems?" It's a lot of audiologists sort of speculating about noise-canceling headphones causing neurological and hearing problems. But they're speculating. They're not presenting any proof. And I wanted to cover this because a lot of what they're speculating about shows that they have no clue how noise-canceling headphones work.
Yeah.
You know, since our Patreon subscribers, we assume, are more interested in the deep tech dives, we'll do that and talk about why these concerns may be misplaced.
Very cool. So we're going to start talking about Aaron's audio corner then?
Let's do it.
Yeah. So let's just sort of describe what this video is. Again, as I said in the intro, this is it's not a wholly untypical video from Aaron, but it's perhaps not the sort of video that he's known for. This is just a very real world, very practical advice video about how to set up a stereo system. And he starts off by talking about, you know, the equilateral triangle and the angle of the speakers, and talking about why, you know, having that equilateral triangle where basically you and your left and your right speaker form an equilateral triangle, you know, why that works for creating this sort of, you know, stereo image and sound stage that he enjoys. And then I think most of us are seeking to achieve if we're into hi-fi, right? And then he goes on, and I don't mean to gloss that over. It's just there's not a lot to say other than this is just very good real-world practical advice. And if you want advice on how to set up your stereo system, go there. But then he starts to get into the subject of distance from the wall. And my ears perked up because that's something that you and I talked about in the last episode when we were covering the subject of, you know, the Darko's video about the room being the most important component of your system. And I think it was me. One of us brought up the fact that in a lot of cases, European speakers are designed with the assumption that they're going to be much closer to the wall because they take that boundary reinforcement for granted. But not all speakers are designed like that. And you can't make broad generalizations. You can't say, well, European speakers this and American speakers that and Japanese speakers this, whatever. But there tend to be more European speakers, I think, that are designed for the way Europeans live. Much older homes, constructed differently, and all of that. But one of the really great things that Aaron did was sort of not just say, hey, this is a thing, but he actually started modeling frequency response of speakers to show you what happens when you move them further away from the wall and closer to the wall. And you talked about the fact that, like, in an ideal world, he starts with the assumption that, people say you want your speakers a meter from the wall. He was like, well, maybe, but it depends on the speaker. And, and he starts to talk about it, how in theory that if you could move them, infinitely far from the wall, well, a lot of the effects start to disappear, but sometimes moving them closer to the wall can create the same. And he does modeling to show that. But then he starts to talk about, like, what you can tell from just looking at the directivity plot of the speaker, right? Mm-hmm. And how and why certain speakers respond well to closer placement of the wall or farther away from the wall. Mm-hmm. Ultimately, though, here's the thing that Aaron does that I really, really enjoyed about the speaker. And he might actually be surprised that this is what stood out to me if he hears this. Aaron did a thing that I strive to do, which is not just give you information, but teach you how to understand a concept so that going forward, you can recognize these things for yourself. So in other words, what I'm saying is Aaron is teaching you how to look at the directivity plot of a speaker and understand things from that and take relevant information about how that speaker is going to perform in your room without having to go to someone else and go, please explain this, what this means to me. He's teaching you what it means. He's teaching you how these principles affect the performance of a speaker in the room. And I just think that's great. I think it's wonderful. And I wish we saw more of this. I'm not saying you need to do more of this, Aaron. I just wish it weren't so uncommon in our industry for someone to break things down into basic principles, right? And arm you with knowledge rather than just giving you information.
This is all stuff that is very, I think, overlooked. I mean, these are simple things. These are things that I've known for a long time. Although it took me years to learn them because when I started out, there was no internet. There were not a lot of good books on audio. There weren't even a lot of well-known audio reviewers, really. And I had to learn all these things by, manufacturers telling me, or by me experimenting, or by, once in a while you'd see some mention of it in Stereophile. And it took me a while to learn this, and I had to teach it to some of the guys that ended up working for me as reviewers. Mm-hmm. I was shocked when, back in the late 1990s, I was having problems with a speaker. I don't want to say who it was, but he was a revered speaker designer and lovely guy. And I was having a problem with one of his speakers, and it turned out they put the wrong stuffing in it.
Wow.
We were trying to get the new model to sound good in my listening room because he flew out, and I was kind of moving them back and forth to move them closer to the wall to fine tune the bass, and then moving them out, to fine tune the stereo imaging, because you move them further apart and you get a bigger, broader sound stage, but you get less of a solid center, right? And, I was doing all that stuff, and he's just kind of like, what are you doing? I'm like, you don't know this? And so I think, it's not, everybody should watch this just to make sure even if you've been doing audio for a long time, watch this video and make sure that you know this stuff. Because, it seems intuitive to me now, but I sure didn't know it, 30, when did I start doing this? 1990?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people don't. And there's so much, if you look at so much of the audio stuff on the internet is dudes giving their opinion about some speaker, and they don't talk about this stuff. And so I really feel like these are simple things that are just neglected, and everybody should watch this just to make sure they know.
Another aspect of this video that I really loved was Aaron calling out manufacturers for not giving more clear use case instructions for their products. Like one of the things he talks about is, where should your ear be relative to the height of the tweeter? Well, it's, accepted as, received wisdom that your ear should be at tweeter height. It's not always the case with PSB speakers, for instance. I think, they're designed such that your ear should be like as much as a foot above the height of the tweeter. In some cases, some speakers are designed that your ear should be between the tweeter and the midwoofer, or if it's a two-way between the tweeter and the woofer. Where is the acoustic center of that speaker? the manufacturer should be telling you in the manual, your ear should be at this height relative to the speaker.
Sure should.
And,
yeah.
But again, Aaron is saying like, hey, if they don't tell you that, you can look at the data from, and it isn't like, I love Aaron for this. He doesn't say, come to me and I will give you the wisdom. He calls out all of the sorts of people that are doing good science, good speaker measurements, and says, look at their data. Like if I haven't reviewed a speaker, Soundstage might have it measured. And here's how you can look at those measurements and tell, and I just, like there's just so much wisdom and so much knowledge and so much understanding packed into this very, very simple and very short video that even if you think you know all of it, go watch it anyway. You're probably going to learn something.
Yeah. And it's watchable. It's not like you're like, what is he talking about? It's very understandable.
Yeah. He's kind of like the Mr. Rogers of audio, man. I didn't mean that as a pejorative. I mean, he's just very approachable, very, and everybody can go, oh, yeah, oh, I get that. Oh, I understand. And it's great, man.
Yeah, he'll be wearing a sweater pretty soon. So
and changing his shoes when he comes into the room.
Yeah. We're giving him good ideas.
There you go.
Better. That's all he needs is a little bit better branding because Mr. Rogers had the branding. So
yeah, go get a cardigan, Aaron.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't think I have much more to say about this. And do you have anything else you want to add?
Just go watch it. It's a rare, straightforward, simple, useful advice that actually works.
And some of it is stuff that most people just aren't talking about, even though they should be.
Right. And now it's time for us to transition into really bad advice that doesn't work.
Brent smash.
Yeah.
All right. We'll be right back. This is Audio Unleashed.
And we are here to talk about a subwoofer review. This may sound kind of exotic and kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Too niche, but it's really not because we're here to combat one of the things that has afflicted the audio industry and particularly high-end audio is, fear of subwoofers and colossal misinformation about subwoofers, which has been out there for just decades. And I kind of thought some of it would be going away because there's a lot of people now that write intelligently about subwoofers and that do really good testing of them and that really have smart things to say. And that would be, well, me, although I don't do a lot because it's a small part of what I do for Wirecutter. But, Aaron Hardison does it. Audioholics has always done it. Audioholics was, a little ahead of me on the curve, I think, with that, and has fantastic subwoofer reviews that go deep into it and tell you everything you need to know and understand the subject. But then when you get to the high-end audio publications, the understanding of subwoofers reverses. It's like a phase reversal. It's like bizarro subwoofer world. And so the subwoofer review that got me so incensed is in Stereophile. It was dated February 20th, so it just came out. The review is just called Rel number 31 Powered Subwoofer by Roger Van Bakel. Now, typically, just to show you where these publications are with subwoofers, every one of these reviews starts out with like 5 or 6 paragraphs of kind of solipsistic musing about, subwoofers. Should they even exist?
Well, and it plays right into my, distraction model of hi-fi, which is, I've often said, people write into me and like, oh, should I upgrade to Black? Like, what is distracting you about your system? When you sit and listen to your system, what are you hearing that is keeping you from, engaging with your music? Let's address those. Well, this review goes to show that many of these distractions are self-created. Like, this guy is inventing problems and looking for a solution to them.
Yeah. So the product in question is, the company in question, let's say, is Rel, which is a subwoofer, an audiophile focused subwoofer company that's existed for as long as I can remember, at least 30 years.
And why is it Rel instead of REL? You've told me this before, but I'm too dense to remember.
Well, it should be REL, but everyone just calls it Rel. It stands for Richard Edward Lord, who is the founder of the company.
Okay.
But their philosophy of subwoofers, since we know that very few pieces of stereo high-end audio gear have any kind of accommodation for subwoofers, and they build their subwoofers to use with that kind of equipment. So you connect it to your amplifier, you get the speaker level signal off of there. You do not affect the signal that goes to your regular speakers, right? So you're running your regular speakers full range. And they have a Neutrik speak-on connector and a special cable they give you that lets you do this. So you can hook them up to any two-channel gear. Well, not any. I mean, any two-channel gear that's not like active speakers. And they're designed to be used only at frequencies below where your speakers can cover, right? So if you use them with normally the sort of industry standard subwoofer crossover point is 80 hertz. But with these, you can do that with these if you want to. They have a line input. You can use them as a regular old subwoofer if you want to. But I don't think a lot of people do. Basically, if your tower speakers are rolling off at 50 hertz or something, or you say you have bookshelf speakers that are rolling off at 60 or whatever, you'll set this thing to 60 hertz or whatever. And it doesn't take over the bass from your speakers the way a subwoofer with a full subwoofer crossover would. It basically gives your system more bass extension, right? Okay. Not more bass output per se. And it's fine. And you can do this with other subwoofers too that have a speaker level input, which many of them do. You can just hook them up to that. There's no technology here that's anything that couldn't be done with a couple of op amps and a potentiometer, right? So, you can go get a Sioux Research subwoofer, just to name one, which have speaker level inputs and connect it to your amplifier output and roll that subwoofer off at whatever. And it more or less worked the same way. I will say, though, that Rels, I've tested a ton of these things over the years, and they do tend to be tuned in a way that seems to pair well with and blend well with a set of stereo speakers, right? It's very easy to get a Rel sub to blend with your stereo speakers. And that's not always the case if you're using a crossover that's built into an AV receiver or into a preamp or something like that, right? So there's a lot of good things to say about Rel. So this guy's reviewing two of these Rel number 31 subwoofers. Each one of them is $7,500. They have a 12-inch woofer and a 900-watt Class D amp. These are going to have the output that, like a $1,000, $900, whatever SVS subwoofer has, right? So John Hunter, who I've known for many years, who runs Rel now, sent him these things, and they had a couple guys go in there and do the whole setup. So they set these two subwoofers up, $15,000 worth of subwoofers, and they cross them over at 29 hertz. Just to tell you what 29 hertz is, the lowest frequency of a Fender Precision bass or a upright bass is 41 hertz. It doesn't produce anything below that. A 5-string bass, like a 5-string electric bass, the lowest frequency is 31 hertz. And as Davey 504 has pointed out, nobody ever plays that note. 5-string basses are really more so you can keep so you don't have to shift as much, right? Right. But it's pretty rare that people would play that note. The lowest note on a piano is 27.5 hertz. So that's right around the area where they're crossing this thing over. That's the lowest note on a piano. And I've played with a zillion piano players. I've never heard one of them hit that note.
Yeah, the pianos don't sound good when you hit that note. For the most part.
Just like electric basses don't sound good if you play the low B on a 5-string. Your amp doesn't really sound good doing that. And so anyway, I guess kick drums probably go down into the 30s or something. I mean, the bigger, the lower they go. And of course, you can have, electronic percussion that'll go down to 20 hertz or whatever. Just as you can have, I guess there are EDM records where there's really low bass. I mean, the lowest recording I know of is, the famous Boston Audio Society recording of the Saint-Saëns Organ Symphony goes down to 16 hertz. That movie with Tom Cruise, Live, Die, Repeat, whatever. What's it called? The Edge of Tomorrow?
Something like that. I don't care.
It's a very good movie, Dennis. Just because it has Tom Cruise does not mean it sucks. And
fine.
But the opening scene of that goes down to just the very opening part of it, where they're showing the Warner Brothers studios, and then the screen kind of whacks out. Is like it's 16 or 18 hertz. I can't remember. It's really low.
Yeah. Well, there's one song that I use for subwoofer reviews pretty consistently. Björk's Hyper Ballad from Post. That has got real information down into the 20s. But, the reason I use that song is because that's very rare, right? It's exceptional to come across recorded content that actually matters.
Right. I would argue that unless you have that Boston Symphony recording, none of the material that audiophiles listen to goes down below 30 hertz. Even, almost none below 40, really. Jazz, you could probably find maybe some Billy Cobham thing where he's slamming away on the double bass drums or something. But still, there's basically no content down there. And so you're spending $15,000 to augment the sound where there's really no content.
Yeah.
John Hunter saying, the setup artists learned how to hear musical cues that solve room issues.
Can I ask you a clarifying question real quick?
Yeah, sure. So
you had mentioned that the crossover point was 29 hertz, and I believe in the review he actually says the crossover, why such a low crossover frequency? But it's not really a crossover frequency, is it? I mean, that is a low pass on the sub, but they're not actually crossing it over with the speaker. Which the reason I ask that is, like, if that's the case, that makes something that he says deeper in the review make even less sense than it seems to. So, I just wanted to clarify that point. It's not really a crossover.
He's saying the subwoofer must begin its roll-off well below the main speaker's useful output. Because the crossover, if you cross over at 42 hertz, he's saying that would result in a noticeable peak right at that frequency. Well, not necessarily.
No, not unless you're using like a crazy steep slope, right? I mean,
no, if you're using a steep slope, it wouldn't do that. If you're using a really shallow slope, you would have it, and it depends on how the crossover is specified. Is it -3? Is it -6 dB? Whatever. And crossover slopes vary a lot. There's stuff that has first order slopes. There's stuff that has fourth order slopes. So to make a generalization like that would, there'd be a noticeable peak at the crossover frequency. No, you can't generalize about that. That's not maybe with their subs. Yeah, I don't know.
Well, with the crazy steep slope, I was thinking of Gibbs phenomenon again. That could create a weird peak, but that would be so high Q. It really wouldn't.
Still, anyway. It's like just to generalize about that is wrong. Yeah, I mean, it could happen if you. Depending on a lot of different things, but to say that just necessarily happens is wrong. But probably, look, there's a whole thing of subwoofers where, yes, the presence of more bass can give you a more enveloping sound. Okay, it's a psychological or a psychoacoustic effect, right? And we'll talk a little bit about that because we're going to have to take a sidetrack on this thing. The sort of key thing here is, I'll quote from the review. On St. Thomas, off saxophone Colossus, Sonny Rollins' saxophone took on extra palpability with the rells in the system. I could better hear his breath pushing through the reed, preceding the brassy shimmer of each note as it left the bell. Now, here's the problem. The presence of more bass, and these things are going to be doing something. I guess with a Sonny Rollins recording with a small kick drum, and that's a standard double bass.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, a double bass, when you actually hear them acoustically, you hear very little 41 hertz. That's the fundamental.
Mm-hmm.
And even that big box can't really put out 41 hertz at any great volume. Anyway, I looked it up. The lowest note on a tenor saxophone is 103 hertz. And he's talking about the breath pushing through the reed.
Now, let me ask you another question. If he actually were crossing this system over at a higher frequency, something closer to 80 hertz.
Yeah.
When you say that maybe there's some validity to that taking some of that load of the deep bass off of the woofers and that tower speaker could affect higher frequency performance, right? If it were crossed over, but it's not crossed over, you're not taking any of that low frequency energy out of the signal path going into that speaker. So,
And, he's talking about his breath pushing through the reed, which I got to say, I've heard a lot of sax players, both live and, I've played with a lot of sax players.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard a lot of sax records. One of my closest friends in the world is a lifelong professional sax player. And hearing the breath pushing through the reed is not something that, number one, any sax player is going to worry about. Number two, do you need to hear the rumble if a car went outside the studio? Is that somehow adding to the... It's sort of like this weird... He's saying how great this is that he could hear this. But also, I wanted to check and see how low the human voice can go. And I got to say, it's tenor sax. Sonny Rollins, to my knowledge, only ever played tenor sax, and he only plays, tenor sax on that. There's a tune called Tenor Madness that Sonny Rollins wrote. So I actually got out my spectrum analyzer and tried to see how low I could make my voice go. I'm a pretty good sized guy, and I can, I'm not you, but I can make my voice go pretty low. And the lowest I could get the meter to show anything was about 80 hertz.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, he's hearing this, but of course, this is stereophile, so it's not blind testing. And how would you blind test with these giant subwoofers in your room anyway? I mean, I guess you could just turn them on and off. You could blind test. You could turn it on and off and not put on a blindfold, so you wouldn't be able to see the woofers moving. If the woofers are even moving, what's going to make those woofers move? Tell me what is going to make those woofers move. Anybody who wants to write in and tell me what is going to make those woofers move on saxophone Colossus.
Yeah.
You tell me.
No, I got nothing.
It's just insane. This doesn't make any sense at all. I got to point out, there's no measurements on this review. Not that John Atkinson was known for his subwoofer measurements, because he doesn't do CTA 2010. And, he just did frequency response as far as I remember. But John Atkinson's fingerprints are not on this at all. And it refers to a column that's, I think, in the same issue as Stereophile by Jim Austin, the editor of it. And the column is talking about how important stereo bass is, or directional bass is, to the sense of envelopment. And it's a paper by Thomas Lund, who's this guy at Genelec, who is also the guy who invented the phrase slow listening, which we'll be talking about in our next segment. All right. So, but there's this whole idea where they took what did they do? They took basically noise, rolled off above 150 hertz, and they played it like in phase and out of phase for people. And well, of course they could hear a difference. When you have two things in audio that are going in phase and out of phase, you are affecting the spectral content, because you're going to get reinforcement at some frequencies and cancellation at others, right? So you're going to hear a difference. Maybe not below 29 hertz, but you're still going to hear. You still hear that, actually, except the only problem is there's what's the content at below 29 hertz. But it's one of these things where it's going into all this stuff where they're just sort of desperately trying to find something to talk about here. I mean, I got to say, there's too many AES papers out there, okay? Audio Engineering Society. There's just too many.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a member. I read the journal, which is 10 times a year, and each one has, I don't know, 5, 6 papers. And it's like, I appreciate your work, researchers and academics and stuff, and engineers and scientists, but like so many of these, it's hard to explain like why it matters. And there's a lot of people running around trying to find something to publish. And I'm sure that's true in many, many fields, because you gotta publish to get attention. And it goes into this whole thing of like, this notion of effective touch, and the idea that touch can feel good. And it's just like, what are they even talking about here?
Yeah.
And it's like, this has just nothing to do with music. It has nothing to do with bass. It's basically people trying to find another reason to make people buy high-end audio gear, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or trying to find something else for people for audiophiles to worry about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Like, I mean, I think I hate to be reductive, but I think there are two types of people in the world. I think there are people that operate more like you or me, where they see something and they're like, what that person is saying doesn't make sense. I'm going to explore more deeply. I'm going to look for the evidence. I'm going to see if I've seen other people making this argument and I already know it to be spurious. I'm going to explore. That's one type of person. There's another type of person that says, I don't understand what this person is saying, therefore they must be smarter than me, And I think far too much of our industry is people preying on that tendency of some people to go, well, if I don't understand it, it must mean that the person saying it is smarter than me, and I should just trust them. And that's unfortunate.
Well, that's happened a lot in Stereophile, as invaluable as Stereophile has been to educating people, including me, about audio. There's also a lot of BS. I read this review. I was like, this reads like it's in the Absolute Sound, which is a publication that does not base anything on anything.
Yeah.
It doesn't base anything on anything. That's a perfectly fine way. That's a silly way to put it, but it's perfectly fine. That's all that they deserve. I'm sorry. Yeah. Except for my couple of friends that are there that I like, who actually write good reviews, and they know who they are. So whatever.
They do.
But it's like, and it just, this review just goes on and on with crazy stuff and claims about how when a bass drum is concussive, you can't fake that from down on the floor, except where do you put a bass drum? Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the big orchestral ones you put, like up on a stand, but like 99.9% of the kick drums, or the bass drums you've ever heard are on the floor. Yeah. And he's saying bass doesn't just propagate along the floor. You can't fake that from being on the floor. It's like, what are you even talking about? Yeah. What are you talking about? You're just making stuff up. It's just the most preposterous. I really think that if John Atkinson had read this thing, he would have been like, let's not say this stuff. Yeah. Yeah. We're just going to have, people jump all over us. I mean, that's, I'm not saying this is a bad product either. I mean, it's expensive, but they're beautifully, look, all the REL subs are beautifully made. Gorgeous. I mean. And you know what I know this is a silly thing, but you know what I really love about this sub? The freaking handles on the side, man. It's like, there's, the price for high-end audio, and given the fit and finish and all that stuff, the price is not out of line. You don't need a $7,500 subwoofer, but you might want one. And, it looks beautiful. Cosmetically, they're some of the best looking subs you're ever going to find. If you want something that will blend easily with your stereo speakers, knock yourself out, man. Yep. But so I'm not criticizing this product at all. I'm just criticizing the way they set it up and the way this reviewer just gobbled up all this nonsense. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Are you sufficiently worked up into a frenzy that we can go start talking about Lachlan here, man? Because
oh God,
I think this is a good time to transition. Maybe get a drink of water, maybe powder our noses, and then come back and boy, you want to talk about some real affronts to science. We got one coming up. This is audio unleashed. Nice. And
that
this time
close.
Around, that was pretty close. You're getting really good at this, man.
Yeah.
Even when you're not close, you kind of got this monster thing going on there, kind of dig. Although I prefer the hillbilly, but whatever. You got to mix it up.
Well,
man.
We'll alternate. I'll go back and forth.
Got to keep it interesting.
Yeah.
So speaking of keeping it interesting, like I said, the road that led us to the topic we're going to discuss today started with Ted Denny of all things, and this is a post from Ted where he basically just posted a link to this video and said, this video proves that blind testing doesn't work. And then he goes on to say, let me just read some of this like directly so we can't be accused of misrepresenting what he's saying. At Synergistic Research, this is how we develop all SR products. We start with two identical looking boxes, but one contains a material difference. And I'm assuming here he's talking about like the things that you stick on the wall, the tiny little dots, and maybe one of them is made out of titanium and another one's made out of, I don't know, foie gras or something. I don't know.
Although, but if they're in a box, that's
a good point.
Well, they'll have the same effect that they would.
Yeah. And he says, we know one box has been We know when one box has been substituted for another in the system, we alternate between the two boxes until we've identified which one we prefer and why. At that point, we open the boxes to discover the internal differences. Mm-hmm. And it goes on from there, but he's basically saying blind testing doesn't work, so that's why we do blind testing. Yeah. I'm missing something about Ted's argument here, but I tend to miss things about most of Ted's arguments. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is Lachlan's video. So again, Lachlan for Passion for Sound. We've talked about him before, but this is special. So he's been, sort of lambasted a little bit in the comments section for some of his wilder claims, and people are constantly like, did you do a blind test? Can you do a live blind test? Can you ABX this or whatever? And this entire 22-minute video is basically him saying, no, because this is why blind testing doesn't work. And I'm going to show you some manipulated images that prove why listening tests don't work or something. Anyway, so he places up these two images and he's like, can you tell which one of these is manipulated? And they're like completely different images. And he's like, well, that proves that you can't see everything in an image in an instant or something like that. I don't know. Yeah. His logic is so flawed here, I can't even follow it. But he goes into talking about how, like, when you're listening to something in a blind ABX test, you can only focus on one aspect of it. Is the transient response? Is it the, emotional content? Is it the this? Is it the that? And you can only listen to one thing at a time. So therefore, blind A/B testing is only going to tell you about whatever aspect you pay attention to. But to really understand a product, you've got to do this slow listening crap. And man, I got to tell you, buddy, this is one of those where the logic is so thin, it's almost hard to critique. I mean, we're going to try, but there's just so little to actually latch on here. It reminds me of, what was the guy's name? Michael Behe. Is famous for inventing the concept of intelligent design.
Oh, yeah.
And the reason he did that is because, he was like, let's teach creationism in classrooms. And they were like, well, you can't do that because we have the First Amendment. And he was like, okay, well, what if it's not God? What if it's an intelligent designer? And it's like, huh? And then he's like, the bacterial flagellum is too complicated to have happened by chance. Yeah. And but here's the thing that gets me about Michael Behe. Did a debate one time with my friend Abby, who works in endogenous retroviruses. And I think she was the one that actually showed him how his argument was completely flawed. He said, all of these things that you claim, well, we can't happen. Like, here's how it actually happened. Here's the legitimate science. And he was like, oh, okay. And then like the next day, he's back to making his old arguments before. So it's like he kind of knows what he's saying is BS, but he's just saying it in hopes that somebody hears it and goes, oh, that sounds confusing, but he says it's science. Okay, I guess we believe it. I'm getting whiffs of that here.
I know there are definitely people who in the high-end audio industry who shill for this stuff, who know better. But this guy still can't figure it out. And since he's kind of nebbishy and he ends every sentence kind of, and he's like, the timing reference of the human ear is 1 millisecond. And he kind of has that lull, I think of like lulling, which works sadly on people as well as it does on dogs. And
he's hypnotizing his audience.
Yeah, he is. So I'll tell you just one of the things. I mean, the point here is basically, and he's not the first one to do this. Like, oh my gosh, audio is so complex, and just the human ear is just so powerful that we just don't know anything, and you just can't. You can't do it with blind testing. And I should do it in an Australian accent, but I confuse that with a British accent. So, but just to point out one example. All right, he's grabbing at all these. He's grasping at all these scientific papers and stuff, which are fine. At least he did that. At least he didn't just say, "Well, I heard it." He says, "Oh, this scientist, that was not bad. This scientist doesn't." That sounds more like Nigel Tufnell.
I was about to say this one goes to 11. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So whatever. The greatest British person ever. Who wasn't actually British.
Here's a prompt for you. Think of Dick Van Dyke trying to do a British accent, and then you will sound Australian.
Oh, I haven't seen that for decades. But anyway, so he's talking about how the timing resolution of the human ear is 1 microsecond, right? Millionth of a second. Sounds really impressive. I think that's probably. Maybe some scientists found some way to get that. I remember Atkinson in Stereophile saying that he saw some paper that said it was 6 microseconds. And, Atkinson, I would believe, which makes sense. Noli, the, famous monster cable founder, way back, I knew him way back in the day, and he would come visit you, right? One demo that he would do is he would take a couple computer speakers and he'd say, okay, close your eyes, and he'll play some content through them. And he'd say, tell me when I've moved one of them. Maybe it was pink noise, maybe it was music, I can't remember. And you kind of listen and you'd hear a little change and you'd be like, oh, that's it. And it was like a quarter inch, right?
Oh, wow.
It's kind of remarkable. You can hear that. Now, how that translated to you should go buy monster cable, I don't know, but whatever. But it's kind of trying to, like Lachlan's trying to do here, is create this mysticism and create this thing of, gosh, I guess everything matters. And so I did some
Was
math.
Was that like a phase thing? Was it like a
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you can hear it.
Sense.
And I actually did the math, and I figured out that sound travels a quarter inch in 18 microseconds. Okay. And so I worked out how far does sound travel in 1 microsecond? And in other words, how far would Noel have had to move that speaker back for me to listen to it if I could really hear a difference of 1 microsecond? It's 1/3 of a millimeter. Okay.
Wow.
So if you're sitting here saying, oh, the human ear has, timing resolution of, I really am bad at this, his timing resolution of one microsecond. So everything matters. And, and he's trying to make the case why cables and stuff matter, right? It's like, okay, well, the difference with that is if you had two speakers and you pulled one of them back by 1/3 of a millimeter, that's how big of a difference you're talking about.
Yeah.
And he's saying that that's a reason to go spend a fortune on cables. And it's just so preposterous and ridiculous and stupid. And he keeps talking about this slow listening thing. This is another thing that these guys do over and over and over, is they keep talking about, well, double blind testing, you're going back and forth really fast and you can't really like settle into the music, and there's so much going on. There's just so much happening in the music that you just can't possibly blah, 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 blah. But of course, as anybody who has an ABX box, which would include Brent Butterworth of Audio Unleashed. Knows you could just stick the ABX box in your system and listen for days with one setting and, with one component, and days with the other and not know what it is. I've done that. I've listened for like an hour, but it doesn't make any difference. But then he kind of says, well, you can do the test slower, but then he basically kind of ignores his own statement. And then he starts to say, well, you do these long, the slow listening tests, and you see what you presumably cited, because he's saying you can't do blind testing. So you do these slow listening tests and you figure out what you like, and then you do rapid A/B comparisons. So I'm like, wait a minute. So you're going back and comparing with another thing, and you're just doing the thing that you said was invalid. It's so stupid. And the whole slow listening thing, that's just partly why all this whole slow listening thing. Look, if anybody is telling you need to do slow listening, they are trying to sell you something.
Yep. Right.
Probably something that doesn't work.
Probably. Yeah, I mean, one of the things is, like, I talked at the beginning about how he's doing, like, can you tell which of these images is manipulated? And they're completely different images. And then later on, he goes, okay, fine, let's use the same image. He's like, but you can't pause these because we're doing an analogy here, and you can't pause the audio, because if you pause the audio, it's just silence. But like, look at these, and I'm going to switch back and forth between. Can you tell what's different? And it's like, you can immediately tell that, like, the second image is a little warmer and a little higher contrast, right? Mm-hmm. And then he goes, oh, but could you tell every single difference that I manipulated in this image? Could you? And he goes down a laundry list of all of the things that he's tweaked. And then the argument that he's making here is, if you can't identify every single change that I made to this image in an instant, therefore it proves my point, and you can't do fast A/B testing. What he fails to comprehend is that, no, what you're proving is that those differences are inconsequential if you didn't pick up on them instantly. It's, oh, this, that, and that. Like, you get the big ones, the important ones, color balance, contrast, right? We know that those are the things that matter most, sort of like with regard to the test he's doing. Therefore, they're important. Therefore, if you accept this analogy, then the most important things you're going to pick up on quickly. All of these other little things that he's talking about, he did, even after I went back and paused, it's like, that does not make a real meaningful difference on the effect of that image. Therefore, let's take things to the logical conclusion. Is he saying that, well, this image is worth, I'd pay $25 for this image, but I'd pay $10,000 for this image? He doesn't make that argument, but I'm trying to make it make sense in this weird analogy that he's trying to weave. Well, no. If you don't see the differences, then they're not consequential. If you don't hear the differences, how important are they? Like, how much money are you willing to spend on differences that just, like, you have to go seek out and go, oh, if I squint my ears really hard, I think I can hear that there's a little... No, like, let's accept the fact that not every audible difference is a meaningful difference. And he got right there. He got right up to the point of understanding that point. But I think, he makes good money not understanding that point. So he's not inclined to try to get it, That plays into what I was going to say next, which is, as I've said many times on this podcast, these guys don't understand music. And
they're like, oh my God, you can hear, differences of 1 microsecond. And I was like, it's like, does it matter? Even if you can, which I contest, it doesn't matter. It's like, and sorry, I'm saying, it's like you're pulling the speaker back by 1/3 of a millimeter, a couple of cat hairs, and that is, there are writers who will say that, some negligible thing made was musically profound. And it's like, if you say, anybody who uses the phrase musically profound in a review doesn't understand music, I'm going to say. I mean, yes, the difference between this little wind-up AM radio, like that has like a solar thing on it that's for emergencies, that has like a 1-inch speaker in it. The difference between this and a really good set of bookshelf speakers, all right, maybe that's musically profound. The difference between 2 cables, if you say that's musically profound, you shouldn't be talking about music because you don't understand it. I mean, I just did a really good recording session last week at Shoreline Community College here, and in the Seattle area, and they have a spectacularly good room. It's big enough to fit a small orchestra, and it sounded great. It was, I've been in Capitol Studio A, and this sounded kind of like that. It was really good. And we did a recording session in there. And people did not worry about 1/3 of a millimeter. Everybody's set up, and they put the mics on the piano. They put the mics on the drums. They put the mic on the bass, and, and it's kind of like, well, and it's not like, oh my God, we have to have the absolute perfect mic. It's like, oh, this mic will work for this. Let's just use this mic. But, I move my bass a lot when I'm playing. And if you're hitting cymbals, you're a drummer, cymbals are going to move around. The flute player on this particular recording, flute players, sax players, whatever, move around. Vocalists move around. These teeny, tiny, 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 tiny differences that they're trying to use to justify spending a colossal amount of money on cables are not musically meaningful at all, because these differences are inherent to the music. And if you can't hear some tiny move the flute player did, it doesn't matter, because the flute player doesn't care. The flute, if you said to the flute player, oh, I could hear that you moved, it sounded like you moved a 1/4 inch between these 2 notes. The flute player would be like, what are you talking about? So this is ridiculous. This guy, Dennis, we've been too kind to this guy. He's spreading gross, absurd misinformation, just ridiculous nonsense. I'm really surprised that Ted Denny would want to sully his reputation by linking to one of this guy's videos.
Wow.
That's a funny line. But I'm also serious.
And the saddest thing is, I've often said, and this is something that I think Aaron pointed out in his video, the video that we discussed in the first segment, like, don't read the comments. I really wish I hadn't read the comments to this video, because so many of the comments are, ooh, you're confirming my biases, therefore this is the truth. It's just, oh, come on, people. Like, the first thing you should be skeptical of is somebody saying something that you already agree with, right? Like, and these people are like, no, you've confirmed my biases. You've hung the word science on this unfounded belief that I have. Therefore, this video is good. It's just so frustrating. Yeah.
And it's also kind of reaffirming the idea that, audiophiles have superpowers. And, the timing resolution of the human ear is 1 microsecond. So I can hear, the difference between, using 6 cable lifters and 5 cable lifters.
Wow. Yeah. Anyway, any more dogpiling on this one, or are we ready to do some credits and get out of here?
No, we have St. Bernard piled on this one.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
All right. Well, I'm going to say it so you don't mangle it. This has been a Butterburger production.
It has indeed.
Yeah.
What do we got for music this time? I'm editing,
Yeah, I got nothing new, man. I've been spending most of the last week at the hospital with my dad, so I got nothing new for you. But I'm going to go ahead and commit to next episode. We'll have something new. So we're just going to.
Well, I actually, I'm finishing my songwriting class tonight.
Ooh,
6-week songwriting class I took, and
nice.
I keep writing new tunes because I hate the ones I write. We're only supposed to write one, but I've written like 4 or 5, and I finally wrote one I like yesterday, and I actually has such a nice melody. So I'm going to make a little version of that, and we'll drop that in, and replete with my awesome Universal Audio Dream 65 pedal and my Telecaster, which has like just the best sound. And nice. It's going to be like a normal. It's not going to be our normal stuff. It's going to be like a recognizable melody.
Oh, very cool. I can't wait to hear it.
I don't know what the other one will be, whatever I can dredge up from some folder on Dropbox or whatever.
Yeah. All right. Any other credits we got to do, or should we thank everybody and say goodbye and move on to our patron segment?
Just do all that stuff.
All right. We're going to do all that stuff. Thanks, everybody. We appreciate you all. And patrons, stick around. We got one more for you.
Coming up.
Bye, everybody. Hey, thanks for sticking around to the end. If you liked what you heard and wish there'd been a little bit more of it, we got some good news for you.
Indeed, we do. If you check out patreon.com/Audio Unleashed, all one word, you can get new episodes a little earlier than everybody else.
And sometimes it's like a day or two early. Sometimes it's nearly a week. We never really know until we start editing.
But the big plus is that you get extended cuts of every episode. And usually that's going to mean a whole extra segment that's about maybe a geekier topic or something that's a little more personal to us, or something that's just going to really appeal to the hardcore Audio Unleashed listener.
Yeah, what it boils down to is if you're somebody who would support Audio Unleashed on Patreon, we're going to make sure the bonuses to every episode are really aimed straight at your interests.
Yeah, and so if you want to hear these segments, you can subscribe to our Patreon for $3 a month, which is less than I spend every single day on my cup of coffee when I go to Starbucks to write my boring articles.
Yeah. One more time with that URL, that's patreon.com/Audio Unleashed.
Or Audio
Unleashed. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.